My name is Otis. I'm 35 years old. And what I'm about to share with you has redefined my understanding of life, death, and everything in between. This isn't the kind of story you hear about over coffee or read in a casual blog post. It's the kind of story that changes you. And I hope it resonates as deeply with you as it has with me. Before the events that unfolded, I wasn't someone you'd call lost. On the surface, I had a stable life. I worked as a creative consultant, crafting campaigns for big-name brands, and lived in a modest but comfortable apartment in the heart of Chicago. My friends would joke about how I always seemed to land on my feet, no matter what. But the truth is, I carried a constant emptiness, like a hollow ache that couldn't be filled. Success? Sure, I had that. Happiness? Not so much. If you believe in God and near-death experiences, subscribe to Life at NDE today. Discover inspiring messages from God through powerful near-death stories that bring hope and understanding. Hit subscribe now and join us in spreading the light of faith. I convinced myself that the next project, the next achievement, or the next big paycheck would finally fill the void. It never did. That October evening started like any other. Mundane and unremarkable. My best friend, Josh, and I had spent the day hiking just outside the city. The crisp air and the quiet trails were a welcome escape from our usual routines. On the drive back, the roads were slick from an earlier drizzle, and the glow of the city lights shimmered faintly in the distance. We were chatting about nothing in particular: work, the best place to grab pizza in Chicago, the kind of conversations that feel safe and ordinary. Then, out of nowhere, a blaring horn shattered the calm. I turned to see headlights barreling toward us, far too close and moving way too fast. The truck had veered into our lane. There was no time to think, let alone react. The screech of metal on metal filled the air as everything spun into chaos. What I remember next is a strange mix of clarity and confusion. The impact tossed us like ragdolls, and the world seemed to fold in on itself. Josh's yell cut through the noise, raw and terrified. But then it all went silent. Not just quiet completely, utterly silent. When I opened my eyes, I wasn't in the car anymore. I was above it, floating, watching the scene unfold like a surreal painting. Emergency lights strobed against the wet asphalt, casting an eerie glow on the crumpled metal that had once been my car. I saw Josh, bloodied but conscious, screaming for help. His voice sounded distant, like an echo coming from the far end of a canyon. And then I saw myself. My own body lay limp and lifeless, partially obscured by the twisted wreckage. It didn't feel like me anymore. It was like looking at an old photograph of someone I used to know. Familiar but detached. The realization hit me like a wave. I was dead. Strangely, I wasn't afraid. Instead, I felt a calmness I can't fully explain. It was like taking a deep breath after being underwater for far too long. There was no pain, no panic, just a quiet acceptance. I noticed details I'd never have seen in life: the jagged edges of torn metal, the shimmer of broken glass reflecting the lights, the sheer desperation in Josh's eyes as he pleaded with the paramedics. Then, like a dimmer switch being turned down, the scene started to fade. The lights, the sounds, even the cold sensation of the air, all began to slip away. I didn't feel fear, though. There was an undeniable sense of being guided, like invisible hands were gently pulling me away. I couldn't resist it. And to my surprise, I didn't want to. Darkness enveloped me. But it wasn't the kind of suffocating void you might imagine. It was warm and soothing, like wrapping yourself in a heavy blanket on a cold night. It reminded me of the moments just before falling asleep, when you're half dreaming, teetering between worlds. In this place, I wasn't alone. There was a presence. Though I couldn't see it. It was more like a feeling. A quiet hum that resonated deep within me. As though it had always been there, waiting for me to notice. And then, the darkness shifted. A tunnel appeared. But not the one you see in movies or hear about in cliched stories of near-death experiences. This tunnel was alive. Swirling with colors and patterns I had no name for. Shapes that defied logic or geometry. It felt like staring into a living kaleidoscope while floating weightlessly in space. I didn't have a body anymore. But I could feel myself moving toward it, or perhaps it was moving toward me. There was no fear. Only a pull so strong it felt like gravity. But far more profound. As I drew closer, the hum transformed into a symphony. It wasn't music in the way we understand it, it was a blend of tones and harmonies that seemed to carry meaning. Like a universal language that bypassed the need for words. I could feel the music more than hear it. Each note resonating through me. Telling stories I didn't quite understand but somehow knew to be true. The light came next. Faint at first. Then growing brighter. Warmer. More alive. It wasn't just something to see, it was something to feel. It wrapped itself around me. Filling me with a love so complete it overwhelmed me. It wasn't like the love I'd known on earth, which now felt small and conditional by comparison. This was infinite. A love that left no room for shame, guilt, or fear. I didn't know what was happening, but I knew I was exactly where I was supposed to be. In that moment, I felt more alive than I ever had in my 35 years of living. That's when I noticed it, the figure. Not a person. Not exactly. But a presence. It wasn't male or female. Young or old. Human or inhuman. It simply was. It radiated wisdom and compassion. A knowing that seemed to reach into the deepest parts of me. And though it didn't speak, I understood it completely. It was as if it communicated directly to my soul, bypassing words and thoughts altogether. And then, it said the words that changed everything: "You're not supposed to be here yet. You're not supposed to be here yet." The words weren't spoken. Not in the way we understand speech. They resonated inside me, like a ripple through still water, leaving no doubt about their meaning. I tried to respond, but I had no voice. No body, just the essence of who I was. Still, I felt understood. There was no judgment in the presence's tone. Only calm certainty. Like a parent gently reminding a child of bedtime rules. I wanted to protest. I hadn't asked for this, hadn't chosen to die. But the presence wasn't offering a debate. Instead, it wrapped me in a feeling so profound that any resistance I might have mustered dissolved instantly. It was love. Yes. But also something deeper, understanding. A complete acceptance of me. Flaws and all. It knew every part of me. Every secret. Every mistake. And yet it embraced me as though I were whole and perfect. As I hovered there, surrounded by the warmth of the light, the presence shifted slightly. It didn't grow or move, but I could feel its attention narrow, focusing entirely on me. And then the experience changed. It wasn't just the light or the symphony anymore, it was something much more intimate. It was a life review. Not like watching a movie of my life flash before my eyes. Though, no, this was something else entirely. It was as though I had stepped back into my memories. Only now I could see them from every perspective. I wasn't just reliving the moments, I was feeling them from all angles. From all hearts and minds involved. The first memory was small. Insignificant, or so I thought. It was from when I was maybe 8 or 9. Standing in the doorway of my childhood home. My mom had asked me to help her bring groceries inside. But I'd ignored her. Too wrapped up in my video game to care. At the time, it hadn't seemed like a big deal. She'd sighed. Carried the bags in herself. And that was that. But now I saw it differently. I felt her disappointment. The physical strain of the heavy bags. And the quiet ache of feeling unappreciated by her own child. It hit me like a punch to the gut. I wanted to apologize. To take it back. But there was no changing what had happened. All I could do was watch and feel. The scenes continued. One after another. Some mundane. Others significant. I saw moments I'd long forgotten, kind gestures I hadn't realized mattered. Like helping an elderly woman cross the street when I was a teenager. I felt her gratitude. Her relief at being seen and helped. It was a warmth I'd never known I'd given someone. But there were harder moments. 2. I saw times I'd hurt people. Intentionally or otherwise. Like the time I snapped at Josh during a heated argument about something so trivial I couldn't even remember the cause. I dismissed his hurt at the time, thinking he'd overreacted. But now, I felt his pain as if it were my own, the sting of betrayal from someone he trusted most. The review wasn't judgmental. The presence didn't accuse or condemn me. It simply showed me the truth. Every action I'd taken, every word I'd spoken, rippled out into the world, touching lives in ways I'd never imagined. I saw how one kind word could spark a chain reaction of positivity. How one careless comment could sow seeds of doubt and pain. And then came the moment that stopped me cold. I saw my mother again. Not in a memory but in the present. She was sitting alone in her small kitchen. Her face lined with worry. She looked older than I remembered. And I realized how much time had slipped by without me truly seeing her. She was praying something I hadn't known she still did, and her words were simple but heavy. She was asking for strength. For guidance. For me. Tears welled up inside me. Though I had no physical body to cry with. How had I let so much distance grow between us? How had I taken her love for granted? The presence didn't say anything. But I felt its message clear as day. This is the weight of your choices. This is the power you hold. And then the focus shifted. I wasn't just seeing my life anymore. I was seeing life itself. The interconnectedness of it all unraveled before me like an infinite tapestry. Every thread weaving into the next. I saw how a single leaf falling from a tree sent ripples through the air. Those ripples touching the face of a child who would grow up to inspire thousands. I saw how one person's pain, if ignored, could spread like a shadow, influencing others in ways they couldn't see. It wasn't just humans, either. I saw the earth, the plants, the animals, all part of the same dance. Life and death weren't opposites, as I'd always thought. They were partners, working together in an eternal rhythm. A person's final breath wasn't an end, it was a release. A return of energy to the universe. Birth and death were just two sides of the same coin. Part of a cycle so vast it defied comprehension. What about pain? I thought, or perhaps the presence heard the question without my needing to ask. The answer came not in words but in a deep, undeniable understanding. Pain wasn't a punishment or a curse. It was a teacher. A sculptor shaping the soul. Without pain, there could be no growth. No empathy. No connection. I saw my own struggles in a new light, the loneliness. The dissatisfaction. The sleepless nights spent wondering if I was enough. They weren't meaningless. They had prepared me for this moment. sharpening me like a blade so I could carry these truths back to the world. And then, the presence spoke again. You can stay. Or you can return. If you stay, there is more to see. If you return, you must carry these truths with you. For a moment, I hesitated. The peace here was unlike anything I'd ever felt. There was no pain, no fear, no emptiness, only love and connection. But then I thought of Josh, still screaming for help in the wreckage. I thought of my mother, sitting alone in her kitchen. I thought of the people I could help, the lives I could touch. If only I tried. I want to go back. I said, not with words, but with the deepest conviction I'd ever felt. The presence didn't show disappointment or approval, only love. Then you must understand the truths you will carry. And with that, the tapestry of interconnectedness faded. The light dimmed, and I felt myself being drawn back. The warmth of the presence still lingering like an embrace. When I opened my eyes, everything felt wrong. My chest burned with every breath. My limbs ached as if they didn't belong to me. And my head throbbed with a dull, insistent pain. The bright, sterile light of a hospital room stung my eyes. And for a moment, I wasn't sure if I was alive or still caught in some liminal space between here and the beyond. Otis, a voice called, thick with emotion. I turned my head slowly. And there was Josh, his face pale, his eyes bloodshot from crying. Tears streamed down his cheeks as he leaned over me. You're back. Man. You're alive. The words hit me like a tidal wave, alive. I was alive. I blinked, trying to process everything. The last thing I remembered was floating above the crash site, hearing Josh's cries for help and the presence guiding me through a tapestry of interconnectedness. Now, here I was, battered but breathing. My body felt like a foreign thing, heavy and sluggish, but undeniably real. Doctors rushed in, their voices overlapping in a blur of medical jargon. I heard phrases like miraculous recovery and 8 minutes flatlined, but their words washed over me without sticking. 8 minutes. That was how long I'd been gone. To them, it was nothing short of a medical anomaly. To me, it was a lifetime. In the days that followed, I began piecing together what had happened. Josh filled in the blanks, his recounting shaky but heartfelt. The truck had slammed into us at full speed, flipping our car multiple times before it came to rest on its side. He'd been trapped, yelling for help, watching the paramedics pull my lifeless body from the wreckage. They said you weren't going to make it, Josh admitted one night, his voice low and raw. I thought I'd lost you. Man. And then, out of nowhere, your heart started beating again. They called it a miracle. A miracle. The word sounded hollow to me. What I'd experienced wasn't a miracle, it was something far greater. But how could I explain it? How could I describe the light? The presence? The truths I'd been shown? Even as the memories of the other side began to fade, like water slipping through my fingers, I could still feel its weight, its significance. But the details were already slipping away, veiled by something I couldn't fight. At first, I thought it would be easy to carry what I'd learned back into the world. I was wrong. The first challenge was language. How do you put into words something so vast, so infinite, that words themselves feel inadequate? The colors of the tunnel, the sound of the symphony, the feeling of interconnectedness, it all defied explanation. Every time I tried to talk about it, the words came out clumsy, hollow, like they were mocking the experience rather than honoring it. Josh was the first person I confided in. One evening, as he sat by my hospital bed, he leaned in close, his expression a mix of curiosity and fear. "Otis," he said softly, "you were gone. Your heart stopped. I swear it was like you were somewhere else. Where did you go?" I hesitated, unsure where to begin. Finally, I took a deep breath and said, I don't know how to describe it. Josh, it wasn't like anything here. It was light, love, connection. I met something. Someone. It knew me. It showed me truths about life. About how we're all connected. Josh stared at me, wide-eyed. But he didn't interrupt. When I finished, he sat back in silence for what felt like an eternity. Then he asked the question that everyone seemed to ask, "Do you think it was real? Or just, your brain trying to make sense of dying?" "It was real," I said, my voice firm. "More real than anything I've ever known." Josh nodded slowly, though I could see the doubt lingering in his eyes. I didn't blame him. How could anyone who hadn't experienced it truly understand? As I regained my strength and returned to my old routines, I realized just how much had changed, not in the world, but in me. Everything I'd once cared about, my job, my achievements, the endless cycle of chasing success now felt hollow, meaningless. Even simple conversations with friends or colleagues felt shallow, as if we were all tiptoeing around the truth of what really mattered. But it wasn't just my perception of the world that had shifted. My senses had changed, too. I could feel emotions in a way I never had before. When people spoke to me, I could sense their joy or pain beneath the surface, even if they didn't say a word. One day, a nurse walked into my hospital room, her smile bright but her energy heavy with sorrow. "How are we feeling today, Mr. Otis?" she asked cheerfully. But I could feel the grief radiating from her like a pulse. "You're grieving," I said gently, surprising even myself. Her eyes widened, and for a moment, she froze. Then tears welled up, and she nodded. "My father passed away last week," she whispered, her voice breaking. I didn't think anyone could tell. I didn't know how I knew. Only that I did. It wasn't a superpower or some mystical ability, it felt more like a deeper awareness. A tuning into the undercurrent of life that most people never notice. The hardest part wasn't living with this new awareness, it was trying to share it with others. Most people reacted with polite interest or outright skepticism when I tried to talk about what I'd seen. "That's fascinating," they'd say, their tone making it clear they didn't believe me. Others were less kind, dismissing my experience as a hallucination or a desperate attempt to find meaning in a near-death experience. At first, their disbelief hurt. I wanted so badly for people to understand, to feel what I'd felt. But then I remembered what the presence had told me: the veil is necessary. Not everyone is ready to hear these truths. And that's okay. My job wasn't to convince anyone, it was simply to live in a way that reflected what I'd learned. So that's what I began to do. Slowly, tentatively, I started making changes. I called my mom just to tell her I loved her. I apologized to Josh for the times I'd taken his friendship for granted. I stopped brushing past strangers on the street without a second glance. Each small act felt like a thread in the tapestry, weaving something larger than myself. But even as I tried to live in alignment with the truths I'd been shown, doubts lingered. How could I reconcile what I'd experienced with the reality of this world? How could I carry the light of the presence into a world so often consumed by darkness? The answers didn't come all at once. They came slowly, piece by piece. as I took my first steps into a new life, one defined not by what I could achieve, but by the love and connection I could create. Returning to my old life felt like stepping into a pair of shoes that no longer fit. Everything was the same. Yet nothing was. My apartment, once a place of comfort, now felt cold and unfamiliar. The city buzzed with its usual energy, but I felt disconnected, like a radio stuck between stations. The rhythm of the world, the endless rush, the noise, the superficiality seemed out of sync with the truths I carried inside me. I tried to fall back into old routines. I returned to my job, sat in meetings, pitched ideas for campaigns, and fielded emails. But it all felt hollow. Branding strategies and market shares seemed so trivial compared to what I'd seen and felt. Each day at work drained me, and I found myself longing for something more, though I couldn't quite define what that more was. One evening, as I sat in my apartment scrolling through emails, a question broke through the noise in my mind. "What are you doing, Otis?" It wasn't judgmental, but it struck me with clarity. I didn't have an answer. I closed my laptop and stared out the window, watching the city lights flicker like stars. The presence's words echoed in my memory, "You must carry these truths." But how? How could I live in a way that honored what I'd been shown? The first step came in the form of a small decision. On a whim, I signed up to volunteer at a local community center. It was an unremarkable place, paint peeling from the walls, the faint smell of old books in the air, but it felt alive in a way my office never had. They needed help organizing food drives and mentoring kids. Nothing glamorous or groundbreaking, but the work felt real, grounded. At first, I felt out of place, like an imposter among people who seemed so selfless and dedicated. But as the days turned into weeks, I found a quiet peace in the simplicity of it all. Packing boxes of canned goods or helping a child with homework might not have been world-changing, but it mattered in ways I couldn't fully explain. For the first time in years, I felt connected not just to the people around me, but to something larger. Living with the awareness of interconnectedness was both a gift and a burden. Every action felt magnified now, like a stone dropped into still water, sending ripples far beyond what I could see. This new perspective wasn't always easy. Some days, the weight of it threatened to crush me. The pain I sensed in others, the suffering I saw in the world, it was overwhelming at times. One morning at the community center, I noticed a young boy sitting alone, his shoulders hunched, his eyes fixed on the floor. I walked over and sat beside him, unsure of what to say. "Hey," I said gently. "You okay?" He didn't look up, just shrugged. "My mom's in the hospital," he mumbled after a long pause. "She got hurt at work, and now she can't pay the rent. I don't know what we're gonna do." His words hit me like a punch to the gut. I wanted to fix it, to make everything better for him, but I knew I couldn't. Instead, I placed a hand on his shoulder and said, "I'm sorry you're going through this, but you're not alone. Okay? There are people who care about you, and we'll do everything we can to help." It wasn't much, but his eyes softened, just a little. In that moment, I understood what the presence had shown me. Even the smallest actions matter. A kind word, a gentle touch, a moment of genuine connection, they ripple out in ways we can't always see. Not everyone embraced the changes in me. Some friends drifted away, uncomfortable with the person I was becoming. "You're different," one of them said during a rare dinner out. "Quieter. Like you're somewhere else all the time." Others were more direct. "You've gotten weird, Otis," a coworker told me after I declined an invite to happy hour. All this talk about interconnectedness and light, it's like you've joined a cult or something. Their words stung. But I couldn't blame them. How could they understand what I'd been through? How could I explain something so vast and intangible to people who hadn't experienced it? Still, their skepticism made me question myself. Was I losing touch with reality? Was I clinging too tightly to a vision that couldn't coexist with the real world? Every time those doubts crept in, I returned to what the presence had shown me: love, connection, and the truth that every choice matters. I didn't need everyone to believe me. I just needed to live in a way that reflected those truths. Over time, I began to notice patterns in the people around me. At work, I watched arguments flare between colleagues, their tension lingering in the air like smoke. But beneath the surface, I could feel the real sources of their frustration: one person's fear, another's insecurity, both feeding off each other in a cycle neither could see. At first, I didn't know what to do with this insight. How could I explain something so intangible? But I realized that sometimes the solution wasn't in words. A kind gesture, a calm presence, or even silence could break the cycle in ways an argument never could. As the months passed, my life began to shift in ways I hadn't anticipated. I spent less time chasing success and more time focusing on the people around me. I reached out to my mom more often, just to check in and remind her I loved her. I started noticing the small, quiet moments that made life beautiful: a child laughing in the park, the way sunlight filtered through the leaves of a tree, the sound of rain against my window. One evening, as I walked through the city, I saw a man sitting on the curb, his shoulders hunched against the cold. His sign read, "Anything helps." For a moment, I hesitated, unsure of what to do. I didn't have much cash on me, and I didn't want to offer empty platitudes. But then I remembered what the presence had shown me: every action, no matter how small, ripples outward. I sat down next to him and offered a warm smile. "Hi," I said. "What's your name?" For a moment, he looked at me like I'd spoken a foreign language. Then his face softened. "Eric," he said quietly. We talked for a while about his struggles, his hopes, and the twists of fate that had brought him to this point. By the time I left, I didn't just feel like I'd helped him. I felt like he'd helped me, reminding me of the humanity that connects us all. Life after the accident wasn't easy. Some days, the weight of the world's pain felt unbearable. But every time I started to falter, I remembered the light, the love, and the truths I'd been shown. Even in the darkest moments, there was always hope, always connection, always love. Life didn't become easier after the accident, but it became richer in ways I never expected. Every day felt like walking a narrow path, balancing between the physical world and the truths I had carried back with me. The burden of those truths was heavy at times, but it was a weight I knew I had to bear, not out of obligation, but because I'd seen what it meant to live without fully understanding the ripple effects of my choices. The changes in my life didn't come with grand gestures or dramatic transformations. They came in quiet, deliberate moments. I began to live more intentionally, to focus on the connections I could foster rather than the achievements I could accumulate. Each action, no matter how small, felt meaningful, whether it was helping a stranger carry their groceries or simply listening to someone share their pain without interruption. But as much as I tried to integrate the truths into my life, there were still moments of doubt and difficulty. One such moment came during a particularly tense day at the community center. A heated argument had broken out between two volunteers over something trivial, but the underlying frustration was palpable. I stood there, unsure of how to intervene. Part of me wanted to step away, to avoid the conflict entirely. But then I remembered the presence's words, "You will carry these truths." Instead of taking sides or trying to mediate, I simply stood between them and said, "I know this is hard, but we're all here for the same reason, to help others. Let's take a breath and remember that." It wasn't a profound statement, but it was enough. The tension eased, and both volunteers nodded, their anger giving way to quiet understanding. It wasn't about solving the problem, it was about reminding them of the connection we all shared. One of the most profound changes was my growing ability to sense the emotions of others. It wasn't a supernatural gift, but rather a heightened awareness of the subtle cues most people miss: the way someone's eyes linger on the floor when they're hiding sadness, the way their voice wavers when they're trying to stay strong. At first, it was overwhelming. I felt like I was carrying not just my own emotions, but everyone else's as well. But over time, I learned to see it as a gift, a way to connect with others on a deeper level. One afternoon, while volunteering at the center, I met an elderly woman named Margaret. She was sitting alone, her hands trembling as she clutched a photo of a young man. "Who's that?" I asked gently. "My son," she said, her voice breaking.